All right. Welcome to the first chapter of our app design and app development course. So before we start, or before we look into how to develop an app with Meteor, JS, and Polymer, let's first look at material design, Google's material design, and just let's get an understanding of how can we make good use of material design and how can it benefit you as a startup and what are the principles behind it basically. Now, just a quick introduction about myself. I am Andreas Galster. I'm a startup guy. I'm the founder of Pigments, a marketplace for print shops. So if in case you ever need something printed like business cards, flyers, roll-up banners, these kind of things, you can find a print shop on our site and you can book the shop through our site. So we're sort of like Airbnb for print shops. And we actually also use material design and we use Meteor.js and Polymer. So basically, I'm going to give you hands-on experience with these tools, just based on the things that we discovered while we were building Pigments, or while we are building Pigments. So aside from being a startup guy, I'm also a designer. I've been a designer for about 8 years now. Graphic design, user experience design, user interface design, lots of things, motion design, graphic design. So I've worked in a lot of disciplines in design. And I'm also definitely a material design enthusiast. And I'm also a Polymer enthusiast. So Polymer, for those who don't know it yet, but I'm guessing you probably know it, Polymer is Google's library for creating web components. And Polymer, or rather a site library, is like sort of like a catalog created by Google with which you can import elements into your apps that make your apps or websites feel like apps, basically, like a Google app. So as sophisticated as a Google app would look like and feel like. So with that said, let's dive into material design. So I have a video here. I'm just going to play this video real quickly. This is from the Google Material Design Showcase Awards. So those are awards. That is an award created this year, which is, watching this at a later time, it will be 2015. Basically, this just shows you some of the best examples of material design apps. And you can see a great variety of how material design can be applied to apps here. So some of the best examples that you can see are, there are categories for best animations, categories for best content, best layout, these kind of things. And you can see there are a lot of great entries here, and you see a lot of motion happening, a lot of fancy, flashy movements. And those are just our showcases or case studies, I guess. And you can check those out at g.co/material design showcase. Now, sorry. So what is material design? So material design are Google's design principles for consistent and adaptive layouts. Now, what does that mean, consistent and adaptive layouts? If we look at this example here, so consistent means your app is supposed to look and feel the same way across screen sizes. So whether you're looking at a smartphone, a tablet, a laptop, a smart watch, or maybe even, let's say, a smart refrigerator, or something in your car, for example, or Google Glass, it should look and feel the same way, right? And then adaptive means it should adapt to your device, to the screen size of your device. And one good example of adaptive layout and how material design also takes us a step further than a lot of other apps or responsive websites for that matter is, if you look at this example and this screen that we have here, we have this yellow button. It's called a floating action button in material design language. And on the smartphone, you can see it's on the bottom right. because it makes a lot of sense to place it there. It's close for your thumb to reach it, and it's just easier to see. It's easy to see the button there. But if we move to the laptop view, for example, or to the tablet view, it would be quite awkward to place that small button in the bottom right corner because we have so much screen space. So it would be hard to find that button, or rather it would be pretty easy to miss the button. So that's one thing how you could describe adaptive layouts. Now, in order to understand material design, we need to understand the big concept between material design. And usually when you hear someone talk about material design, especially at Google, for example, and also when you check out the Google design guidelines, you're going to hear material is the metaphor. And you know, I could tell you right now, why don't you just go on the Google material design guideline website or guidelines, and then most likely, even maybe if you're a designer, you will probably be confused about the guidelines, and you will be a little bit, insecure about what exactly are they talking here, because they talk about a lot of strange, unfamiliar concepts like material, paper, ink. And in order to understand material design, we need to understand what they mean with material is the metaphor. What do they mean when they talk about material? Now, in order to understand what do they mean when they talk about material, is we need to understand how have we interacted with apps or websites so far, or interfaces for that matter, and how are we going to look at them, and how are we going to interact with them in the future. Now, this is how it looks right now, right? We have our smartphones. We hold them in our hands and we slide with our thumbs, we tap buttons, and it's very close to us, sort of. But at the same time, we have this weird screen between the real world, us, our fingers, and what's happening on our devices, on our digital devices, right? And if we look at this, this is the landscape sort of right now. We have smartwatches, smartphones, tablets, and then we also have laptops, of course. But very soon, it's going to look more like this. So we're going to have Google Glass, for example. We're going to have augmented reality, virtual reality, but more augmented reality, or how they call it at Microsoft, for example, blended reality. So that means the digital interfaces are coming into the real world. They're blending with the real world. This is how it's going to look like probably not even 5 years from now. So we're going to have the interfaces, well, right in front of our eyes, basically. Or maybe even in our eyes or in our brain cells, whatever you want to call it. But it's going to look like it's right in front of us. Now, the interfaces are coming closer to us, and they're moving, they're closer to the real world, right? So, because for that reason, material design takes hints from the real world. Now, what does that mean, material takes hints from the real world? So, to understand this, let's look at a very simple example that really helps us understand material. Now, let's look at this. Just a standard keyboard, just keys of a keyboard, laptop keyboard. And we all know how to use a keyboard, right? So why do we know how to use a keyboard? Well, sure, we've been using keyboards basically forever, and we sort of grew up with keyboards. But we actually know how to use keyboards intuitively based on how they have been designed. Now, if you look at this keyboard, for example, the keys of the keyboard, they have certain properties. They have physical properties. Objects in the real world, they have certain physical properties and physics. They have a certain feeling, the grip of the keys. How do you touch the keys so you don't, just slide off the keys? How does it feel right to press the key? How heavy or light is the, the feeling when you touch the key? The material itself is very rough, just to give it that nice feeling. And then also what you can notice here is the keys are sort of elevated, right? They are sort of in the foreground of the whole laptop, and they throw shadows, right? Stuff can be layered on top of each other or in front of each other. There's depth to objects, and all those are properties to the real world. Now, what Google did was they were thinking of how can we take those properties and translate them to the digital interfaces. And if we look at this here, maybe not everyone might actually know anymore what this is, right? It's a newspaper. It's an analog newspaper, a paper newspaper. So for those of you who grew up with paper newspapers, we just know how a newspaper works. We've been working with paper as human beings for I don't even know how long, but it's been quite a long time, right? And it just feels natural for us to flip a page. It's very normal, right? It's a little bit like touching your smartphone, in the sense that we can use gestures to interact with the medium. So what Google did was they thought of how can we take those properties, or what they did was they played around with paper, and they came up with something like this. They created an icon in this example, and they just played around with the paper. They folded the paper up, and then they threw in some lights into their scene and came up with some natural shadows. And then they realized, hey, can we use this somehow for our design language, and can we use paper, the properties of paper for our design language? And they did this. They played around a lot with paper, and they came up with icons. And here in this example, you can see how they experimented with the icons, and you can see how elements are throwing shadows based on how close or far things are from each other. They can be layered on top of each other. They have like sort of depth, that's what you can see here. So what they came up with material design are two main tools, I guess you could say. The first one is paper. So again, they played around with paper, and they thought of their interface as sort of material. Material is the material that the interfaces are made of are sort of metaphorically paper. Now, paper could be stacked on top of each other, and so they can have relation to each other, and that means paper adds dimension and context to interfaces. And to understand this, if you look at this example, important elements or elements that get into focus all of a sudden move closer to us in the real world, but also in the digital world. So what they want to achieve is they sort of fake that the element is coming closer to us by raising a shadow, just how it would work in the real world. And by doing that, it suggests that the objects are coming closer to us and are important at the current state in an interface. To look at an example, if we look at this example, we have three very common user interface elements, or button elements for that matter. So on the left we have the paper floating action button. Then in the middle we have the raised paper button, and on the right side we have the flat paper button. Now, without actually explaining anything about the characteristics of those buttons, simply by looking at the visuals, we could already understand the importance or the signals that those buttons are trying to give us. If you look at the left button, it has a very big shadow, meaning it must be closer to us, or it must be, it's closer to us, but you could also say sort of it's farther away from whatever object it is throwing a shadow on. Then we have the button, the paper button, which is a smaller shadow, and then we have the flat button, which has no shadow, meaning it's like really close to the surface. And what that means is the floating action button is suggesting, hey, you desperately should click me. And that's why it is one of the most important elements in material design. And then the raised button suggests, hey, yeah, hey, look at me. You need to click me. Probably not right now, but eventually you need to click me. And then there's the raised button, which has no shadow at all. And it's more like very subtle, saying, hey, you know what? Hi, I'm a button, but most of the time you probably don't need to click me, or at least the first few times that you look at an interface, I'm probably not that important to you yet. Now, the second concept is ink. So we see this ink effect here already, where it's sort of like ink is dripping out from the center where something is clicked or being interacted with. So ink gives meaning and emphasizes interactions. Now, what does that mean? Let us just look at an example to understand this. And this here, the material design calculator, is a very beautiful example to explain what this means. So if you look at this calculator, we can't even really see the finger of the person interacting with the interface. But even though we can't see the finger or what's happening with gestures, we can understand the feedback. We can see what's going on because those ripple effects, those ink effects are happening. And this gives meaning to our interactions and makes it clear what's happening on the interface. So yeah, ink emphasizes meaning. So just some visual characteristics of material design. Material design uses simple shapes. So generally, when you look at material design, what you're going to see are very basic shapes: circles, squares, rectangles. That's what you see over and over and over. Material design also uses a lot of white space for beautiful rhythm. So if you look at this example here, we have, well, a very minimalistic interface here. If you think about it, and if you look at this, we have two inputs to define a title and a description, and that fills out, well, that's probably like 1/3 of the whole screen. And that's quite a lot. So elements get a lot of room to breathe, and they just have a lot of white space to create a nice pattern in rhythm. And if we look at an example of pigments, maybe by the time you will see this, it might have changed, who knows. And this is pretty much work in progress anyway. What you see here is a lot of white space. Elements on the interface have a lot of room to breathe. You see circles on the right side, you see the floating action button, you see the circles on the left again. Those elements are always spaced nicely apart from each other, and we don't cram the user interface. And we see basic shapes over and over. The rectangle image, or that the whole container for the front view, where it says Makati City and where everything is inside of it, is a square, right? So very basic shapes to create beautiful rhythm. So we looked at material, which is the main principle behind material design. So that's really great for understanding material design. So that's the first principle, core principle of material design that we need to understand. The second one is bold, graphic, intentional. And the third one is motion provides meaning. So first, let us look at an example of bold, graphic, and intentional. Now this is a really great example of bold, graphic, and intentional. If you look on the left side here, if you look on the left side, very graphical, a huge graphic, very bold. Then here you see also very bold the headline, right? Immediately we can tell what the app is about. Now, to be honest, the title of the headline is kind of terrible, because Todoist, what does Todoist really mean, right? It's a weird word. Is it even a word? I don't know. But it basically means it is a material design to-do app, to-do list app. Or, yeah, to-do list, to-do task app. So very bold, draws the attention of the user. And then very intentional, and again bold, is if you look at this interface. So we have this image here just as an eye catcher, basically lots of white space everywhere and not a lot of colors. And then very intentionally we have this button sitting here alone and it's colored, and that's very intentional to symbolize, hey, this is the only element that really stands out from this interface. You need to click me. This is what we want you to do. So this is a good example of bold, intentional, and graphical. Now, what do we mean when we talk about motion provides meaning? Now, first, here we have an overview animation of some core principles of material designs, animation properties, or ideas / concepts in material design. So if you look at a few of them, consistent choreography, you see the elements flowing in from the bottom left, and they have a continuous flow. They don't just flow in from all sides, right? Like the elements, they're flowing in like this. They're coming from the bottom left, right? They're not flowing in like from all kinds of, from all directions and then, just weird. Sorry about that. Then delightful details. Just the tiny little details that make an interface beautiful and delightful. Those are not necessarily for your user experience, but they just add a nice touch to it. Then we've already seen this here. Point of origin, meaning wherever you have an interaction, that's where your animation should come from, because that gives a visual clue or hint to the user. Where are things coming from? Where do things relate? And where are they going? And last but not least, we also have material response. It's going to show up in a second. So also meaningful transitions, but that's sort of also again what we talked about with the point of origin. But if you look at material response, it is paper. The sheets of paper on our interfaces can give responses. They can interact with us. So if we touch something, for example, it comes to the front and shows that it has an active state. Now, let's just look at a few examples. Here, this one is a very nice example. Although the animation is not my favorite, but you can see how you click, and then you can see some context, how the element, this paper material element, is coming to the front and just showing some context where things are coming from. And that just tells us, okay, something happened here. We clicked on this element and it pops out. And so this must be this element, obviously. Another example, very classic, and that you see in general in material design very often, is this effect where you have this small button, sometimes a round button, and it suggests an action, like let's say you want to add images. And as you click this button of images, it sort of transforms into your canvas. That makes a lot of sense if you think about it, because your affordance, your action, or your button, what you intended to do, all of a sudden turns into that task, essentially. So those are the three principles. Material is the metaphor. You need to understand what is material. Things can be layered on top of each other. They relate to each other. They have depth. They have shadows, right? Then bold, graphic, intentional, and motion provides meaning. Now, if you want to start with material design yourself, you might be a little bit lost. So one starting point for you would be the templates created by Google that you can actually download, which are Illustrator files, and I think also Photoshop, if I'm not mistaken. But I downloaded the Illustrator files here, and you can just see a few interface variations with different screen sizes next to each other that you could use. So let's look at one just quickly. We have here, it's sort of a contact list app. So we have the desktop view. As things get smaller, they get a little less space. Tablet view, then eventually we're not really mobile, but somewhere in between of mobile and tablet. And then eventually things get smaller and they become like smartphone view, where they are split screen, unless you basically go back and forth between those states as you interact with the elements. Now let me give you an example how you can apply material design. So as I said earlier, Pigments is a marketplace for print shops. So what that means is you can request an estimate from a print shop, and then you get a list of all the estimates or all the projects that you've worked on in the past, or that you requested from print shops. And vice versa for the print shop, they can see who wants to have something printed from them. So this is what I had initially. That was just like, okay, I need a list, quickly get it done because I needed to get this out, right? And it sort of works okay. It's not exactly awesome, but it gets the job done, right? And then I tried to convert this into material design, and quite quickly I was able to design and code this in less than a night, and this is what I came up with. And again, if you look at this example here, you can see a lot of the principles again, like very, very bold, right? The image, the header section here, and here the headlines are very bold. And if you look at the price here, the price tag, right? It's very bold, colored very intentionally. The colors have been chosen very intentional. I want the user to see this right here. This is very important to the user, right? That's why it is bold and just intentionally very large. And then the buttons here, the only colored elements, sort of, or flashy colored elements, are those two buttons. So those are the main elements that I want to suggest. Hey, you need to look at these buttons. You should not just look at them. Eventually, I want you to interact with those elements. Now, we've talked about material design, and I really love material design. Material design is very great, but it also has a slight dark side. Now, let's look at this dark side. So the dark sides, which are also good sides at the same time, in fact, are material design hides content from the user, and material design makes heavy use of icons. Now, what does that mean? Let's look at material hides content from the user. Now, if you look at this example, we have this floating action button, and it hides a lot of interactions away from the user. Now, in this example, this is not really a bad thing because the button itself is designed to want to be clicked, and it's the only colorful icon. But let's say if we would have some very important interactions that we want our user to take, but they might be hidden, they might be hidden here in this icon or in this icon. Chances are perhaps your user is never going to click on this icon, or going to click on it too late, and he will miss out on some very important features of your app. Then we have material makes heavy use of icons. Now, icons are great, but if overused and when you use the wrong icons, this can be a big problem. Now, if you look at this icon here, it's a filter icon. And some people might understand this is a filter icon, and some might not understand what it means. And if you don't understand what the icon means, this will really get you lost in the interface. So you need to be careful which icons you're using. Like a really good example is this one here. So for the younger generations, what this is saying, I showed my 12-year-old son an old floppy disk, and he said, wow, cool, you 3D printed the save icon. So If you think about it, we're still using the save icon, but younger generations don't really get why is it the save icon. It's a weird icon actually for them. They're just so used to it because it's such a universally used icon, but actually it makes no sense at all to younger generations which didn't grow up with the floppy disk. So you need to be careful which icons you are going to use. If you use a lot of icons in material design, you need to make sure that you are going to use an icon that is universally understood. Now, this presentation here that you see was actually part of a material design workshop that I gave a while ago, and eventually the idea was we did a workshop. We created interfaces with paper. So we took sheets of paper and then we created our interfaces, sort of similar to the way that we would draw paper prototypes with just pen and paper. But instead we used sheets of paper to understand the metaphor and get a feeling for this. Now, this is not, we're not obviously not going to do this here because this is not a workshop, but I encourage you to try this out. And if you want to try this out, we're going to look at some common user interface elements that are used in material design all the time. So the building blocks for material design apps and websites. So the first building block, very, very common, the most common, most likely the most common interface element in material design is the paper floating action button. And you see it in almost every material design interface. And can have different colors, as you can see here, and it is this slightly big round button that floats on top of everything else and most of the time scrolls with you, so it doesn't really disappear. And an example how it is used very often is you have this button and then it reveals more content, and this is a really good example of how it works. Then we also have cards. So tiny rectangle or square shaped elements are sort of their own small world, and they are used to create grids of elements. An example would be here, for example. So every one of those cards are their own element, and we can see they are their own entity. Then we have paper tabs, very common in apps, to switch between different pages that you can use very commonly on mobile, sometimes also on desktop, although on desktop it needs to be done very carefully and you just don't want to use it wrong. Then there's lots of toggle elements in material design or form elements, like here you have the paper toggle button, for example. And while we're looking at these examples, always notice that there are animations in even the tiniest details. Here also, the paper input, and it animates as you click or focus on the input field and type something. The label floats to the top, and every interaction gives like slight feedback, and everything has animations because the principle of motion provides meaning. You see it all over in material design and in your interface elements in material design. So in case if you ever build your own elements, you need to keep this in mind. Now let's look at let's call it paper drawer or the drawer panel. So this example is very good because in fact it is not 100% spec compliant with the material design language. It does not look how Google would want you to have your app or your drawer panel to look like, but it still applies the common material design principles of motion provides meaning. For example, as you click here, they come from the top left to the bottom right, and that just gives a hint where are things coming from and where are they going. So what this shows us is material design are principles. We can use them for our advantage. We don't need to 100% follow Google's this design guidelines, right? you need to know the rules so you can break them, right? That's what they always say, and that also applies to material design. And if you would look at the spec compliant way of how Google would do it, this is how it would look like. So it looks visually different, but it is very similar in how they behave, right? Still, of course, it gives you some different options here. You can have more screen space, but in general, it's very similar, and you can make use of the principles of material design for you. Just use them wisely and take advantage of those principles. And then, well, as I said, we laid out our material design interfaces. So if you want to grab some sheets of paper and cut out some shapes and have some fun with it, and think of your app, take some of those basic interface elements, think of basic shapes like circles and squares and rectangles, and arrange them on a page, on a sheet of paper, A4 maybe, and just see what you can do with your app, or website for that matter. Now, just quickly, for you to round up, if you want to get inspiration, this year Material Up is one of the best sites that you could possibly check out. In fact, a lot of, or almost all the examples that we've seen in those slides are from Material Up. So you can see a lot of great animations and concepts, interaction patterns that have been designed by awesome designers. So kudos to all those designers who created those samples. Thanks so much for sharing those with us on Material Up. Awesome job. So here's the site, so just check it out. Then also check out g.co/material showcase. Again, that's the showcase for material design, the awards that Google created starting this year. Also check out google.com/design, which just covers design in general, not even just specific to Google, but in general, just design. Just interesting to see what is Google doing with design, right? Where are they going? Because Google's very design focused now, a lot more than it used to be even just 3 years from now. So definitely keep an eye out on that. And of course, check out google.com/design/specs, which are the Google material design specifications, so the guidelines. Here is where you can see the fine details of material design and read more over what is paper and what is ink. If you don't fully understand paper or ink yet, or if you have questions about these things, I would suggest before you read the specs, look at some of the videos that they have that go over the principles of material design and how they came up with it, because those really make a lot of sense to understand material design better. Then, well, since this right now is a free course or a free introduction to my course on Udemy it's gonna be on Udemy most likely, also Skillshare and maybe some other sites. And this part is free. That's the introduction. And what we're going to look at next is we're going to look at how can we prototype a little bit our interfaces, right? Then we're going to look at how can we use Meteor.js and Polymer. And what is very interesting here is, aside from how can we apply material design with Polymer, is also, I think, what a lot of people are probably very interested in is how can we use material design, how can we use Meteor.js and Polymer together, because Meteor.js and Polymer do not work well together. And I've been using Polymer for a while, I've been using Meteor.js for a while. I'm better with Polymer now than I am with Meteor.js, to be honest, but since I'm an advocate and a lover of both frameworks/libraries, I have managed to figure out how you can use Meteor.js and Polymer when you're using Shady DOM, which is the newer polyfill, because you don't want to use the old polyfill. The old polyfill works with Meteor.js out of the box, no problem. But if you want to use Meteor.js with the newer polyfill of Polymer / web components, which is less performance hungry, then check out this course, because I'm going to show you how to get it done. And once you finish this course, you will be able to build awesome apps that look awesome. We're not going to go too much into the Meteor.js principles, like whatever, reactivity, collections, and all that stuff. All that blah, blah, blah. I expect you to know a little bit, at least, about Meteor.js, because there are great books out there about Meteor.js. But, well, actually, we'll have to see. Maybe we will look at some things, but basically the way that I'm using Meteor.js right now is I use it for the things that I consider it to be strong at, and then do everything else with Polymer. So expect a good mix of both, but probably more Polymer specific. The hardcore Meteor.js stuff, you're probably going to find that in other resources, like what is there? DiscoverMeteor.com is a good book, right? Meteor Cookbook, these kind of things. I'm sure maybe last time I checked, there's not really a good Meteor.js course, just Meteor.js specific, but there's definitely a lot of good resources online for you to check out. So anyway, check out this course if you want to learn start to finish about Meteor Polymer prototyping, just basically how to get out your first app. And I think we will probably not turn it into a to-do app. I mean, maybe we will, but I'm not yet sure actually which app we're going to build, but maybe we're going to create something more interesting. And we're going to look a lot at the animations and how to build awesome animations with Polymer as well. So with that said, may the material be with you. And just a shameless plug at the end, I guess. Again, if you're looking for a print shop, you should check out pigments.io once in a while, because this is going to be an awesome site where you can find print shops and where you can book them. So we're going to make it easy for you to print stuff. So yeah. Thanks so much for watching, and I'm hoping forward to see you in the paid version of this course. But actually, if you would like to just maybe donate if you want to, I would absolutely appreciate it, because, or just pay the amount for the course, because, well, as you can see, I'm a startup guy, and startup people are generally incredibly broke. So if you want to help me out until my startup is really successful, please go ahead and support me. So also, if you want to just contact me, here are some contact details. The phone number is actually a Philippines number, so you need to add the +63. But you can email me, or you can check my Behance if ever you want to hire me for Polymer work or Meteor.js work, or maybe design work, right? So thanks again for watching, and stay tuned and get the course. I hope you're going to get the course. Thanks so much. I hope this introduction was helpful for you, and see you. Also, one last thing that I forgot to mention, or that I just realized I should mention. A good resource where you also can find me all the time is polymer.slack.com. So check out the Slack channel for Polymer, because I'm very active in this channel. So yeah, see you.